But if we clear that space, drop down a little bit, then often all these things come.
And I was thinking more about the communication between two people.
As well.
And the flow that is cause and effect.
Exactly. The capacity of the mind increases as we go down. And they say that particularly if you gain access to the subtle mind, we can start to read people's minds and things like that.
So my question is, does it go other way around as well? If we're in the course mind and we don't have this understanding, we are not aware of this communication, like subtle
ability to communicate.
Is it an ability or just something that is happening anyway?
I mean, if it's, no. I mean, unless we're in that level, then we're not, it's not, no, I don't think so.
Okay. Yesterday I asked you about the level, if there is level of emptiness, and you said, and I think you explained about
the levels of experience, yeah,
so,
they're going on top, yeah.
So from this sitting, I was sitting in awareness, and I asked who is aware. So there was this eye, although it seemed that it wasn't very attached eye, so it wasn't very attached eye. And then when you suggested go large, then something felt very different, and I wondered if this emptiness is...
Yeah. I mean, this, as we've seen, this style of practice today is quite different to the looking for the person. And particularly with this practice, I think what's very helpful here is this, because it's the releasing, the grasping, that can really lead to an insight, that there is no me or no awareness, because it's just... So this is the sort of questions I think that I find quite helpful here. But of course, just resting in open spacious awareness, just doing that is not necessarily an insight. I mean, it depends if we have some questioning behind it or understanding, then it can become insight. It's like, I think I said before, like if we just look in this room, that's not insight. But if we're looking on the basis of a question, then we can have insight. Oh, they're not here, or there they are.
So what is it? Just
well, again, like you can have it. You can, like in your case there, who's observing? Who's observing? And then you look and you see, and then you realise there's no observer there to be found.
I think I could be for a long time in this, maybe a void even, of emptiness, with no question.
And then it's just a nice, quiet experience. And so that's, I mentioned earlier, but now I'll maybe re-emphasise, is it's very easy to confuse these sorts of experiences that are just an open, spacious, quiet experience with emptiness. So just because our mind is open, spacious, nothing going on, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an experience of emptiness. There has to be insight there. So we need, and it's easy to confuse. So therefore, it's good for these sorts of things, if we're really working on this sort of practice a lot, to have access to a teacher and say, well, this is my experience, what's that mean? Because otherwise we can really like go off on a tangent and just be resting, like I said, it's sort of in this void state, thinking on realising emptiness, when we're just sort of temporarily in a very quiet space, and not really getting anywhere apart from being a little bit quiet for a while. So this is important.
I'm confused.
Resting in awareness, yeah.
Resting in awareness.
Sure.
And one of the instructions is, I mean, we're saying that we're getting awareness in upon itself.
Right.
That's one thing. And the other thing is saying that when we're watching the stillness, then someone's watching.
Right. And so that's what we're going to ask this afternoon.
Yeah. So if there's someone watching and there's awareness turning on itself, like here's this difference.
Well, that's what we've got to look. That's exactly the meditation for this afternoon. So wait till this afternoon. And of course, we're not trying to intellectually answer. We're trying to see directly.
In the practice itself, what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. So we'll address that sort of that is one of the meditations for this afternoon. In fact, exactly that.
I'm going to do another meditation similar to what we just did.
Yeah.
So what am I supposed to do?
Well, in the one we said is the first question was the awareness we're resting in, is it located somewhere? So we just look, because often it seems like it's somewhere here, or is it here, or is it that?
I just follow the instructions.
Yeah, just follow instructions. Yeah. Don't then go, oh, who's doing that? I mean, that is a valid question, but that's not this meditation. That's this afternoon's meditation.
Two small questions following her question and your answer to that.
Sure.
So how do I know what you were describing as just having like this relaxed feeling and no thoughts? Isn't that being mindful of awareness?
Correct. So that's a shamatha practice.
So that's a valid practice.
Valid practice, but people confuse that with a realization of emptiness because it looks very similar.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so that's one thing.
Yeah.
The other thing is just like we do with the mind, where we like irritated it, like brought up a memory, someone insulting us, whatever. So I try to do kind of the same thing, just telling myself, okay, I'm aware of this, I'm aware of that, and starting from there, because otherwise I didn't really know.
Sure. I mean,
it's like with the picture.
yeah. I mean, you could do that. I mean, that's sort of what we're going to be doing this afternoon. You could do that, and then you ask the question, who's looking at that? Who's aware of those thoughts and emotions? Or, if you want, you could say, where is that thought?
Is it a thought?
Well, whatever you bring up, you could bring up an emotion or something, or a memory. You could, I mean, you could do a number of things there. You could go, who's having this memory? Who's observing this thought? Or you could go, where is that memory?
But that's like mental activity. I mean,
No, you ask the question and you look. It's like, if you're looking for a certain person in the room, you need a question. Because otherwise, if you just look, there's no insight. But if I said, is Leora in the room, you don't turn that into an intellectual exercise, you just look on the basis of that question. You go, oh, there she is. So
maybe I'm not getting.
So again, if you are looking at a memory, you're just looking.
I'm not talking about the memory.
Well, whatever. Bring up whatever you want.
I'm trying to do something that's not like a thought, just the bare.
But remember, in the practice we're doing now, we're focusing on the mind itself. We're not investigating any appearances.
Yeah, no appearance. Just being aware of, let's say, my hand.
Well, that is an appearance. So we're not doing that practice this morning. We are not investigating appearances. An appearance can be a hand.
No, like even when my eyes are shut.
Yeah. So we are investigating the awareness that has all of these appearances. That's what we've been doing in the last couple of meditations. It's a valid Vipashyana practice to look for the appearance and investigate the appearance, but we haven't been doing that so far. And we haven't been investigating who's the observer. That's this afternoon. So all we've been doing in these last couple of meditations is looking at awareness itself, investigating awareness itself, what we've been resting in. We haven't been interested in appearances and where they are and all that. That is another type of Vipassana, but that's not what we've been doing.
It's not what I think what I meant.
Ah, okay.
Although it's like, in order to get in this place where I'm observing awareness, aware of awareness,
right,
staying in stillness, I wanted to raise this thing that's awareness, that being aware, that's knowing.
Oh, I see. You wanted to have an object, but yeah, you can do that.
You're actually knowing it without thinking, though. Just not thinking, but
right. I mean, you could bring up a whatever and look, and then turn on that and just rest in that, and then investigate that. Yeah, you can do that. If you at the beginning you know what is this thing on.
Yeah.
If you're confused, you can do that. Yeah.
just like the self.
Yeah, you can bring up something, observe it, and then just turn in, and then stay there, and then investigate that. Yeah.
I wanted to ask two questions. How it's influence on my everyday life? This exercise, especially.
Vipashyana.
Yeah.
It's the same as all emptiness practice. It's a famous quote from the great Indian master Aryadeva, who's the main disciple of Nagarjuna, and he said something like, the emptiness of one is the emptiness of all, the seer of one is the seer of all, meaning if we come to realise emptiness with respect to anything, person, mind, body, whatever, then that translates into realising emptiness of everything. So if we use this, it'll be the same benefit as realising emptiness of person.
Okay, thank you. And the second one, like from yesterday, the everyday life. If I look on this flower, it's like if I can see it beyond my thoughts. This is an emptiness.
Beyond your thoughts.
Beyond, like beyond my conceptual mind.
There is no flower beyond your conceptual mind.
You just see something without.
But that's the whole point here. There is no something outside the conceptual mind.
But if you can look at the cup,
Right.
that's it. So
Yeah, but the cup only exists in your conceptual mind.
I know.
Right.
If I can see it without my conceptual mind.
You're saying see it. What it?
What I can see with my
See,
eyes.
the thing is that we're asking these questions on the basis there's a me here. And of course, if there's a me here, then of course there's a cup there. Of course. Either that or we're completely hallucinating. So the real question is, who's the me? Or who's the awareness? And that's what we're looking at now. We answer that experientially, then this is obvious. Right down the back.
Two questions. One, is it possible to realize emptiness just with shamatha, without vipassana?
No, but you can, yeah, shamatha is not realization of emptiness, but what you can happen is we can be doing a shamatha practice and sort of intuitively come to an insight into something, but there's still, it's not just pure shamatha then. So rather than consciously asking a question and investigating, you could simply by observing intuitively come to an insight. Oh, but there's still that insight, but it's not an explicit one. So shamatha, pure shamatha is no emptiness.
And the second question is, you said that there, like in the beginning, there might be glimpses of emptiness,
Mm-hmm.
not like,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be a big experience of emptiness. So, what would be the indications of having glimpses or experiences of emptiness?
One would be, it would be difficult to describe, and probably some residual effect. Residual effect meaning after the experience there's something still happening. And again, often that can be a lot of joy or bliss. There can be the mind very calm. There can be this sort of outpouring of love and compassion. These are sort of signs.
It's the same question as before, but about the last question, if there is something other than awareness. So what I was thinking during the meditation, it's things we are not aware of, that they are maybe outside of awareness, but maybe I cannot know if they exist because I'm not aware of it. And then is awareness dependent, and if it is dependent, so dependent of what? Because it doesn't have like, or it does, maybe, I don't know, if it has like parts or causes and conditions, like what is?
Both.
Both.
I mean, the awareness you have now is arising from the awareness of a moment ago, isn't it?
So
that's a cause,
yeah.
And the condition is all the other factors that were present a moment ago.
Sensory?
Well, it can be mental or sensory. I mean, there are many conditions. I mean, for the mind we have now, of course, the underlying cause of the mind now is the mind of a moment ago. But then the conditions can be all sorts of things, physical and mental. Like, for example, you might have had a calm mind a moment ago, and then at that time there was a condition of a person there, a physical object, person, and that acted as a condition for that calm mind to transform into a mind of anger. So what was the cause of anger was not that person, but the habit of anger that was in our mind a moment ago. For that habit to manifest, we needed the condition of the person, which is not a mental thing, it's physical. There's a person there. So everything arises depending on causes and conditions. The underlying cause, which is often called substantial cause, has to be sort of a similar type. Meaning that the mind we have now can't be caused by some physical object.
Okay.
But physical objects can be conditions to affect how minds unfold.
And what about parts of awareness?
Parts of awareness, again, is we can do that in sort of we can talk about the continuum of mind.
So you say mind when I asked about awareness.
Same, mind awareness, same. Mind consciousness awareness, when we speak like this, is the same. When I say rest in awareness, we're resting in the mind, the coarse mind, we're resting in consciousness. Same.
Because, so maybe I'm just a bit confused, because when we practice Shamatha, we have the Shamatha of the mind, which is not, it's like a narrow part of awareness, because awareness includes like also sensory.
No, awareness itself is not including any appearances. I mean, when we're resting in awareness, we're not looking at any appearances.
No, not looking, we're just
resting, exactly. So when we say,
we can notice things that come up in the mind or things that come up like in the body, if it's sensations. But when we look in Shamatha on the mind, it's only about mental events.
Because as a Shamatha practice, it's more effective to narrow down to that. We can, with the mind, observe sensory events as well, but as a Shamatha practice, it's too much movement for it to be effective.
Okay, so, and as far as if there are things we are not aware of,
then as there's a quote here that I had. I haven't got it here. But we're quoting a physicist basically saying that, no, I've lost the quote. But basically, the only things you can confirm exist are the things you experience. So to talk about a reality beyond that has no meaning.
it's gonna resemble to her question. I saw that everywhere I look, awareness is there, but I know that there are things like thoughts. There are things in my mind which I'm not aware of. This is part of the practice that we do, the shamatha. Like you said, that we will see the beginnings of the unconscious.
Right.
So I'm not aware of this right now, but
Right.
I know that it's happening because I experienced it before.
Right.
So my question is, like, first of all, I say that mind and thoughts are not awareness.
They're not?
If I look at them, but there are processes that are happening without an awareness.
So
So
remember, here in Vipashyana practice, we're trying to see how does the mind exist.
but
We're not trying to observe all the movements of the mind. That's Shamatha practice. We're not interested in understanding what's going on in the mind in this practice. We're interested in understanding how does this mind exist. That's all.
in awareness.
Awareness, mind, consciousness, same.
Okay, so maybe thoughts. So what is the
Thoughts are
subconscious?
contents.
What the subconscious is what?
Because mind
It's mind.
is a level of mind that we're not directly
Aware.
aware.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're not aware of it.
right. So,
So it doesn't exist, you know. That was your answer to my question before. What about things we're not aware of? And then she's saying we're not aware to the subconscious, like the very subtle mind. We're not aware of it.
right. So what?
How can we know it exists?
Well, we're not interested in that. We're interested in the mind that is here right now. How does that exist?
Okay.
We're not interested in, is there a subtle mind and how does that exist? We're only interested in knowing the mind that is present right now, at whatever level that is. How does that exist? That's all we're interested in.
Okay.
Yeah. We're not trying to know, is there a subtle mind? Is there a very subtle mind? I mean, that's interesting, but that's not this practice.
No, it just
That's not
seems
this
to me that
practice.
nothing, like there is no way to tell if something exists without, like I have no idea.
Right, but this practice is not about knowing what exists. That's not this practice.
Awareness.
This practice is about knowing how things exist.
Like
How does the mind that is present right now, how does that exist? That's all we're interested in.
Awareness is the only thing I know and I will ever know.
Well, you know cup. You know your thoughts.
I'm aware to the cup, I'm
Yeah.
aware to my thoughts.
Sorry?
I'm aware. Yeah.
Right, and then therefore you know it. That's what knowing means.
So it's not contradictory
What's not contradictory?
what you're saying. So I'm aware of the things that I know.
Well, if you're not aware of them, how do you know them?
I am aware of them.
Right, and then?
So that's it. Okay.
But remember, this practice is Vipashyana practice. It's not about understanding what exists. This practice is about understanding how things exist. Yesterday we were trying to understand how does the me exist. Today we're trying to understand how does this mind exist, the one that we are experiencing right now, this mind, how does that exist? That's all we're interested in.
So it's just awareness is there if I look at it, if I'm aware.
Well, I mean, if you're unconscious, it might be difficult, but now there's awareness there all the time, isn't there?
But
Isn't it?
It's
Yeah, now our awareness is going out, and so in this practice we're turning it in and just looking at itself and seeing how does this awareness exist? The one that's aware of all this stuff. That's all we're interested in this practice. Right, got to go back to the practice. I want to just add a couple of quotes and then we'll go to the meditation. So in scientific materialism, that theory says everything can be explained in terms of matter and energy, and that the mind is what's called an emergent property of the brain. So mind is derivative or secondary. But here in Buddhism, we're saying mind is fundamental in reality. And we're going to look for that. We're going to look at this mind, this awareness now. But before that, just a couple of quotes about this. And one we've already covered earlier that says from Andre Linde, who's the professor of physics at Stanford. He says, the current scientific model of the material world obeying laws of physics has been so successful that we forget about our starting point as conscious observers and conclude that matter is the only reality and that perceptions are only helpful for describing it. But in fact, we are substituting the reality of our experience of the universe with a conceptually contrived belief in an independently existing material world. Is it possible that consciousness, like time-space, has its own intrinsic degrees of freedom, and that neglecting these will lead to a description of the universe that is fundamentally incomplete? What if our perceptions are as real, or maybe in a certain sense are even more real than material objects? The standard assumption is that consciousness, just like time-space, before the invention of general relativity, plays a secondary subservient role, just being a function of matter and a tool for the description of a truly existing material world. But let us remember that our knowledge of the world begins not with matter, but with perceptions. And then another quote from Max Planck, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics and was really the originator of quantum theory. And he says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science to the study of matter, I can tell you as a result of my research about the atoms this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particles of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of consciousness and mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And then last quote from Donald Hoffman, this cognitive scientist, he says, as a conscious realist, I am postulating conscious experiences as ontological primitives, the most basic ingredients of the world. I'm claiming that experiences are the real coin of the realm, the experiences of everyday life, my real feeling of a headache, my real taste of chocolate, that really is the ultimate nature of reality. I believe that consciousness and its contents are all that exist. Space-time, matter and fields never were the fundamental denizens of the universe, but have always been from the very beginning among the humbler contents of consciousness, dependent on it for their very being. So while neuroscientists struggle to understand how there can be such a thing as first-person reality, quantum physicists have to grapple with the mystery of how there can be anything but first-person reality. So let's investigate that. See what our experience is. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness,